Perfect. Okay. Welcome everyone to the City of Greater Geelong. Welcome to the meeting number 217 of the Planning Committee. I'd like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of the Greater Geelong community today. I'd like to introduce today your panel, Councillor Anthony Aitken, the Mayor, Councillor Stephanie Asher. My name is Kylie Grisbeck, Councillor. I've got Councillor Trent Sullivan, Councillor Belinda Maloney and Councillor Jim Mason here as well. Do we have any apologies? I think Councillor Mansfield is an apology. I'd like to introduce you today to the officers that we have. Joanne Van Slageren on the end is the Manager of City Development. We've got John Rush, who's the Coordinator of Statutory Planning. And we've got Rory O'Loughlin, the Team Leader of Statutory Planning, and Steve Rusak, who's the Principal Planner here today. The procedure for this hearing this evening will be that the officers will present a brief summary of the written report to the committee. The objectors will then have an opportunity to speak to their objection, and we would ask that objectors speak no longer than 3 minutes, after which a notification I will have up the front. I have had requests for a couple of extra lengths of time from a couple of people, so I will allow that. Panel may ask questions of the officer, applicant or objectors at any time. And at the end of the presentation, the panel will refer to discuss the application and make a decision. Applicants and objectors should refer their comments to the panel and not to each other in the room. The panel hearings are not a question and answer forum, but a chance for the parties to explain their position or views to the panel. The panel has read all of the submissions and all of the documents, so you can take as read all of the documents have been read by all of the councillors. So in your submissions, please just touch on those points you wish to highlight. The decision of this committee is a final decision of council and we are acting under delegated authority. And if anyone is aggrieved by this decision of the committee, they may appeal to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal in Melbourne, and our staff can assist you with that process in office hours. I'd like to have a confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting of the 3rd of June, and I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Mason and Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. Any conflicts of interest in this to declare, councillors? No. All right, so the matter before us is planning application number PP 396-2020. It's for the property at 147 to 153 Windermere Road in Lara. And I'd like to hand over to Steve. Thank you. Steve, I might get you to just turn your mic on, if that's okay. And just try and talk because they're sensitive. Get a bit closer and a bit... Jake might just...
Are we getting any luck there?
There you go, yep.
Terrific. So just for the benefit of everyone present, my name's Steve Rusak. I am a Principal Planner with the City. I've had passage of the application through the City's process and prepared the recommendation for tonight. In summary of the recommendation put to the Planning Committee, the property, as the Chair has mentioned, is at 147 to 153 Windermere Road in Lara. It's just under 5,000 square metres and has been excised out of a larger lot on the south side of Windermere Road opposite Serendip Sanctuary. The site itself is remnant farmland that has been fenced on two sides, with the south and the west side open. The whole site, including the surrounding land on the south side of Windermere Road, is within the rural living zone, and the site itself is subject to the bushfire management overlay. There's adjoining land to the east, which is also in the rural living zone and is used and developed for rural living and dwelling. And the land to the south surrounding to the west also is currently vacant as a development site. This is a permit application that proposes to change the use of the land and to develop a fire station for career firefighters. The building itself requires planning permission, as does the removal of some remnant native vegetation within the road reserve to create some vehicle crossings for the building. The building will be a fit-for-purpose building. It will include car parking on the site for those employees and some visitors at the front of the site. The maximum height of the building is shown on the plans to be 6.2 metres. There is some landscaping and a 2 metre high fence around the east, south and west of the site, with the front of the site open. There is also included some service facilities such as water tanks, a hard stand area and a 19 metre hose drying tower. The building's proposed to be occupied 24 hours a day over 2 shifts. The shifts of firefighters is proposed to be between 8 and 12 firefighters. Over those 2 shifts, 1 shift in the morning through the day and 1 overnight. The projection is that the emergency service call-outs will be approximately 2 a day, increasing over time to 3 a day as the area around that part of Lara and north of the city starts to develop further. 1 in 3 of those call-outs is expected to be, or is likely to be, during the night. Emergency warning lights are deployed at call-outs, but sirens, we're told, are only deemed necessary by the incident controller and won't occur every time. The native vegetation is for some scattered native grasses in Windermere Road, as I mentioned before. This particular application is the second application we've received for this site. The first actually was submitted to council at the beginning of last year. That particular application was put to public notice, but also to the public land manager of Serendip Sanctuary, who came back and sought some further information, which we then sought from the applicant. As a result of that, that original application did lapse, but was resubmitted later with the additional information at a later time, and the current application, as we have it, was re-advertised. In total, we received 106 objections to the grant of a permit. Among the issues raised by objectors had mostly to do with the potential effect, or perceived effect perhaps, of the development on Serendip Sanctuary and the use and the biodiversity of the area, the incompatibility of the use and development in the rural living zone, the consultation process, loss of amenity, traffic and road safety concerns, among some other things. The application was submitted to relevant authorities, including Parks Victoria and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, as managers of the Serendip Sanctuary site over the road, to the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority for consideration of impacts on the floodplain, the CFA in the interests of the land being within a bushfire-prone area and bushfire safety, Barwon Water for sewerage connection, and none of those agencies have raised objections to the grant of a permit. Just in terms of the summary, I'll skip through to some other more significant matters, as many things will be raised during tonight's proceedings, I'm sure. The proximity of the site it was a major concern for objectors, who I'm sure will perhaps speak later to this, but from the perspective of the planning assessment itself, the site itself is not protected habitat for wildlife, and the only established biodiversity impacts of the use should be mitigated by the recommendations of the fauna assessment that was submitted as a part of the application, and those mitigation measures were supported by DELP in terms of its vegetation screening for light in particular. There are some permit conditions that speak to this matter, and you will have seen those in the recommendations. It was brought to our attention by one of the objectors very recently that condition number 8 of those recommended permits would need to be revised to update the Australian standards for light. I don't have the wording in front of me, but I do have the wording in front of me, my apologies. For the control of obtrusive effects on outdoor lighting, the wrong standard was referenced in the condition, and if the panel was to recommend granting of the permit, that would need to be updated. Operational reasons for this location being selected by the applicant and by Fire Rescue, what is now Fire Rescue Victoria, are not matters of planning consideration. These are operational matters that are dealt with by the public authority that would develop and operate the site. So operational matters and the suitability of alternative locations has not been a primary planning consideration in this recommendation. I've mentioned here in my summary that in circumstances where VCAT has reviewed council refusals based on the prospect of a better site have been overturned and permits granted in the past. On that basis, I just want to bring to the panel's attention my recommendation that a permit be granted with consideration to all of the decision guidelines required by the scheme at Section 60 of the Planning and Environment Act, and recommend that a notice of decision to grant a permit be issued. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillors, I'm going to open it up at the moment if you'd like to ask the officers any questions. No questions? We may have some more questions for you as the time goes through. Thank you very much. So, as I said, we do have a timer. I do have a timer here. I have the magic button. What I'm going to do is I've got a list of people that have registered to speak, and then I've got, I think, one or two others that have arrived as well. So I'll try and allow everybody that I can, but I will go from the registered speakers first. So on my list here, I do have Barry White. You are up first, and Barry has requested just an extra bit of time as well, so I will allow that. Now, thank you, Barry.
That's most of my time gone, I think.
All right, Barry.
My name is Barry White and I'm representing the Township of Lara Care Group. TLC is an incorporated community body established in 2004 to advocate on behalf of Lara region residents on environmental and development matters. Our principal focus at that time was, ironically, protection of Serendip Sanctuary. I must say that there is anger and frustration that here we are again after successive hearings, planning meetings and council and ministerial intervention associated with previous applications at this location for over 15 years, arguing essentially the same case. And what is particularly galling, I have to say, is the planning report comment that opinions diverge on whether the proposed location is the right one or whether another location would be better. However, it is not considered that the number of objections received nor the matters they raise are significant enough to demonstrate that a net community benefit will not be achieved or that a significant adverse social effect will result. And a lot of the focus tonight is on net community benefit, which I'll keep coming back to. We happen to be in the middle of a pandemic with lockdowns and other restrictions over the past 18 months preventing public information sessions, and during which a 6-month obfuscated freedom of information process also took place. These hardly added to assisting transparency or community consultation. Many residents have not been able to express their views, particularly given matters where significant community interest is involved. If that had been the case, we would have had a lot more objectives and a lot more people here tonight. The proposition that this is about net community benefit when the costs to the community have been completely ignored is misleading. No one in our community opposes another fire station in the region. I want to be clear about that. We still support another fire station. Nor do we suggest that it doesn't protect human life, as mentioned in the planning report. The debate is about its location, and we argue that there are options at other locations which would enable a new fire station to achieve community objectives more effectively, more efficiently, at lower community cost, and with less social discord. The key locational considerations are 1, proximity to Serendip Sanctuary, 2, proximity to the existing fire station, which will continue to operate, and the third is the distance from many of the so-called future major response destinations. A few comments on each. The location adjacent to Serendip is arguably the most sensitive in Lara, as the sanctuary is a major community asset. Its importance can't be underestimated, given its contribution to domestic and international tourism, wildlife conservation, education and the regional economy, with many thousands of tourists and students visiting the site each year. Why would anyone contemplate putting such an important and valuable community asset as Serendip Sanctuary at risk? It was suggested by the applicant that it was appropriate to use the site because it was in the rural living zone. At no stage did anyone mention the reason why it was retained as rural living zone. A 200-metre buffer was agreed several years ago by all parties, council, government, developers and community, to reflect sensitivity to the sanctuary and provide future protection for it. Even though planners were supposed to represent the buffer in planning documents, such as the Lara Structure Plan, this was never done. The buffer was subsequently incorporated into the decision to retain the land as rural living zone. According to the current planning report, there was no guarantee to protect the site from use as a fire station, despite its intended 24/7 operation, day and night, with consequent noise and light emissions. It is, however, noted in the planning report that referral authorities acknowledge that there will be impacts on the free-range wildlife. It's not a case of whether, there will be impacts. I also note the author's comment questioning why we didn't apply for other environment protection methods to protect the area, such as overlays. We did previously request on a number of occasions such measures, including environmental significance overlays, significant landscape overlays and distinctive areas and landscape overlay. On each occasion, we were discouraged by planners from pursuing these options. Second, proximity to the existing fire station in Mill Road. And Madam Chair, I do have some maps here that might be of interest to the panel, so I'm happy for people to have a look at those. But proximity to the existing fire station in Mill Road is an important point. The proposed site is only a couple of minutes from the existing volunteer CFA fire station. It is significant that the planning report has only one reference to its existence and none of the supporting documents refer to it. Why would you have two operational fire stations so close to one another, covering much of the same area? If the two fire stations were positioned to reinforce each other rather than overlap each other, it would make much more sense. Third point is distance to major response destinations. A range of critical destinations has been suggested as justifying the proposed site. In fact, as the 8-minute critical response map indicates, and that's one of the documents being circulated, most of these critical sites are outside or at the extreme edge of the 8-minute response range. Avalon Airport, Barwon Prison, Kem Ring, the Industrial Estate, Geelong Northern Growth Corridor and others. With the Mill Road Fire Station and a new fire station to the west, closer to growing development and with faster access to the south and west, such as along Bacchus Marsh Road, the network would be much more effective, efficient and would provide greater net community benefit. There is no indication in any of the documents that any other sites were evaluated. So how can it be argued that this meets community expectations and yields the greatest net community benefit, as it should be required to demonstrate?
Barry, would you mind just making a final comment there, please? Okay.
The Planning Officer's statement, it is the CFA and FRV, not council or lay community members, to determine where the most suitable location is particularly offensive, even if I speak as a lay community member. Cutting to the conclusion, net community benefit is about balancing all of the pros and cons in this planning decision. The planning report fails this test and it does not identify all of the economic, social and environmental costs associated with it. This is not just a decision that will affect the amenity of a few near neighbours. It will have an impact on the whole Lara regional community well into the future. While we can move the fire station, we can't move the sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Members of the panel, do you have any questions of Barry? I have a question, Barry, for you whilst you're here. The maps that you provided here, so can you just explain to me the timing, what you've called the timing map around the distance between the prison, the fire station and the current fire station?
The proposed fire station to, and we've used as the benchmark the Barwon Prison because that's been a major destination, is around 7.1 minutes. That's drive time from that location. And as we'll indicate, I think others will indicate, with developments down Windermere Road, that's going to be affected in future. And so that's one of the aspects. The other areas like the Northern Growth Corridor and Kemmering are further. The second map that I've indicated there shows the location, and that's the critical response map, shows the location of the proposed fire station, and in light grey is the existing fire station. And our argument there is there's considerable overlap between the two fire stations, which makes little sense in terms of establishing a new network for the region. And this is a regional service we're talking about.
Thank you, Barry. Any other councillors? Councillor Mason. In there, Councillor Mason. Sorry, you might want to take. It's flashing, Councillor Mason. There you go.
My time's already gone too, Barry. Barry, have you had much opportunity, A, over the years, and B, recently, to discuss this with the fire authorities and come to some negotiation with them?
We attempted that process right at the start when we first learned about what was being proposed, and we did request a community consultation process. In fact, we assisted the notification of that. In the original application, there was only something like 21 people who were advised of what was going on. We took it upon ourselves to advise others. There was an online community session, community information session, which ended up just a chat line. It wasn't an information exchange. We were just told, and there was no opportunity for us to interrogate answers. And that, frankly, is the only community consultation that took place.
This is with the fire authority?
Yeah, this is with what is now FRV. It was with the permanent CFO.
And have they shown any sign of interest in consideration of alternative sites, or has it been a fixed position all the way through?
We believe it's been a fixed position all along. I should mention we did have a meeting with our state parliamentary member back in, I think, March 22nd of last year, when 5 senior FRV people attended, or senior CFA people attended. We were effectively told, well, this is what you're getting. It wasn't a consultation process. There was no opportunity for us to talk about options or other locations. So it was a fait accompli as far as we were concerned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Maloney.
Thank you so much, Chair. Barry, thanks so much for your submission, and your maps are really helpful. I'm concerned about the obfuscation. Can you give us a bit more information about how you feel that the community was obfuscated in the information exchange that you just mentioned?
Yeah, we started the process, an FOI request, very early in 2020. And I'd have to show you the exchange of emails. They were considerable, and it was extremely difficult. I was eventually told that the negotiation of the land took place prior to April 2019. There was something like 1,081 pages of documents relating to it that had been identified. We got 32 heavily redacted pages, and that was the extent of it.
Very much.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Aiken.
Barry, thanks for your presentation. I just want to get a bit of historical context of this, in that the Lara Care group isn't necessarily opposed to the concept of a fire station or a second fire station, not at all. Is that's right? That's
absolutely correct.
However, the historic relationship on the site is that people see this as a development opportunity site. Your primary concern is that it doesn't protect the intent of the relationship between how you move from developed area to rural living area to Serendip, because this is actually a very commercial and industrial activity that's being proposed in terms of a fire station.
Thanks, Councillor Aiken. Yeah, look, that's absolutely correct. I mean, again, when the rural living zone 200-metre buffer agreement was reached, it was always expected that it was going to be developed primarily for residential use. And it's interesting that the lot next door to 147, 153 had been proposed as a tourist facility, and that was rejected by council because of the activity, a whole range of issues, but the activity and also the impact potentially on the sanctuary. I'm not saying that was the principal reason, but it was the sort of activity that was taking place. And of course we're saying here, well, this is going to operate 24/7. The other facility wasn't going to operate to that degree of intensity. So the use for what is now proposed as a fire station is basically a commercial industrial application, and we think it will have the impact on traffic. And as I say, it's not just the sanctuary, it is the location, it is the fact that it doesn't provide the sort of service that the community might expect for the future, and it does break down that buffer that was originally agreed between residential development and the sanctuary.
Thank you, Barry. We might move on to the other objectors. Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list, I've got Roger Smith, please.
Thank you for cleaning that up. Barry, you're very messy.
Thanks, Roger.
Madam Chair, could I just ask whether I could have about another 15 seconds or so?
Please go for it.
I've timed this numerous times and I've done my best. My name is Roger Smith and I'm one of the directors of Echidna Walkabout Nature Tours. I just want to thank the committee for calling this in. I think it's very important that this has become political. It's a major decision that the council is in the process of making, and I'm very thankful that this has happened. I provided the councillors with our objections to the proposal. I will now paraphrase them. We are proud to have operated successfully for close on 30 years, bringing international visitors into the region and to Serendip in particular. We have turned an unknown touring location into an internationally recognised travel destination, and that's no mean feat, I've got to tell you. It costs millions of dollars. As a result, we have become a significant economic and social force within the community and had plans to grow our activities into the future. Our objections provided historical, empirical and scientific evidence on how the proposed fire station will impact both the amenity and the net community benefits provided by tourism. In the main, the planning report ignored our considerable impact and in fact at times mocked it, and instead relied on the input from two organisations that know little, if anything, about tourism. For the record, I am unaware if Visit Victoria was consulted. Also, I want to reiterate what Barry said before. CFA never asked for our input and was not the slightest bit interested in talking to us, although we did try. The future of Echidna Walkabout in the region is in the balance, and I want to make this very clear. After 29 years, we know what we're talking about when it comes to tourism in amenity and benefits to the community in the region. I hope all councillors appreciate this. Our objections express concerns about the proposed fire station's impact on our international wildlife tourism operations and on the subsequent socio-economic impact on the region. This is not new to us. We are recognised across the world for our efforts to involve community in what we do. In the past 2 years, our business has been hit by a number of very serious issues that include major fires across our operating regions. That may not appear important to this case because there's been no fires here, but it did impact on us as a business. A misguided and now called in draft master plan for the region by Parks Victoria, which is still being considered and which we haven't heard anything about for 6 months or more. And the pandemic lockdown to inbound tourism. To now have to potentially deal with the impacts of a large 24/7 operating fire station and its construction, I might also add, adjacent to a significant wildlife reserve in our home operating region, knowing it could be located in another place if the effort had been put into finding an alternative, has triggered us to suspend our operations in the region, including cruise ship work. Now, all councillors know about this. I've sent out a letter about it. A decision by this committee to approve the fire station at its current location will mean that we will vacate the region as soon as we've fulfilled our current obligations to our industry partners. That's how serious this is. And I'm not playing games here. This is not an idle threat, but a business-based judgment. The community loss to the region will be significant. In a nutshell, we're fed up with fighting a rearguard action in the Yuyangs region. In conclusion, I want to thank councillors for their support for our business and to our not-for-profit Koala Clancy Foundation, and look forward to your ongoing support. And I thank you very, very much for listening to this. I would prefer that I wasn't even here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Councillors, I'll open it to you. Do you have any questions for Roger at this point? Councillor Aiken.
What impact do you think the noise from the movement and the fact that the vehicles will have sirens going, what impact will that make on the amenity of your tourist activities? Yeah.
That's a very good question, Councillor Aiken. We've detailed that in our report, and it's much more complex than what it appears. All I can do is just draw on a map that we provided in our report, in one of our initial objections, through past. Here's an example. When the building started on the southern side of Windermere Road after the buffer was created, the movements of wildlife at the western end of the sanctuary moved backwards towards the north, away from Windermere Road. We saw that over a number of years as the building projects continued on the south side of Windermere Road. On the eastern side of the sanctuary, where there was nowhere near as much building, wildlife stayed abutted towards the fence on the Windermere Road. In other words, we can actually show through our own 30-year cycle at Serendip that wildlife is impacted not just by noise, but by a whole range of other activities. It takes a long time for wildlife to get used to certain activities, and in some cases they never do. We have seen this procedure of working with wildlife not only in Australia but in Africa, where the way you approach animals and the way that they're impacted by noises and activities and sounds and smells that occur regularly and more importantly irregularly have a much bigger impact on wildlife than what people think. It's a complicated thing. It has a lot to do with amenity, and it has a lot to do with how people perceive what they're actually being involved in from a tourism perspective. So it's not a cut and dried thing. This is not, there's noise here, is that going to impact animals? DELP, the department that planning went to, can say, no, it probably won't. I'm telling you, as a tourism operator, it does. It doesn't just happen here, it happens everywhere in the world. And there's a way that we deal with it as tour operators. DELP doesn't know what it's like to run a tour, and I want to make that very clear. The facts that have been given to you by the planning report only deal with how DELP and Parks Victoria think that we will be impacted. It isn't the actual reality of what actually happens.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. Roger, just to continue on with the subject of impact on wildlife, I notice in the documents there's on the north side of Windermere Road, there's to be a vegetation buffer. Have you got any comments to make on that?
Look, the best comment I can make, and this is such an easy thing to talk about. The sanctuary over the years has had visits as we monitor wildlife that comes into the sanctuary. In the exact location that you're talking about, little eagles used to nest. They no longer nest there, and that was caused by the development on the south side of as I just said to Councillor Aiken, that was caused by that. There's been a number of other situations where even screening by planting trees. And by the way, it does take a long time for trees to grow, and there already is dense screening there. It's not as if this is going to change very much. If you stand inside Serendip Sanctuary and the western side of the sanctuary, there are trees between you and where the fire station is going to be. We've already seen the impact of the development that's occurring there at the present time. It's not going to make any difference at all. You grow trees 30, 40 metres high, it's not going to make any difference. It's got nothing to do with whether the animals actually see what's going on. It's got a lot to do with what they hear, what they smell, and how regularly it happens. But I hope that answers your question.
I might continue that question later. Thank you.
Okay, I'd love to talk to you about it, Mr. Councillor.
Okay. No other questions at this point. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Next on my list, I have Frank Schallerfour. Frank is also someone that's requested a little bit more time. So, Frank, I will allow you a little bit of extra time. But we just won't repeat, we don't want to repeat necessarily what we've already heard, if that's okay. Thank you.
Good evening, Planning Committee members. I am Frank Schallerfour, a longtime resident of Lara. I fully support a new fire station, but not at this location at Serendip's front door. For 17 years, stakeholders have fought to protect this valued regional asset. The proposed facility fronts a well-established, extremely sensitive biodiversity area that must not be damaged. The value of established local and international tourism and educational assets so important to the region will be jeopardized if this application is approved. I quote our mayor's comment in Tuesday's newspaper, where she stated, "We want to be a leading example of environmentally and socially sustainable planning," unquote. This proposal certainly does not meet this objective. Tonight's decision is critical to our region and to Serendip Sanctuary. The key feature of Serendip is its free-ranging wildlife, so close to an urban township. Because they are free-ranging, they are especially vulnerable to increases of invasive noise, light, and traffic, and over time will disappear, resulting in the loss of Serendip's principal attraction. The fauna assessment and planning officer's own comments acknowledge these impacts will occur, that he describes as regrettable. The unproven proposed mitigation measures simply will not work to abate the negative effects of emergency lights, loud diesel engines, air horns, sirens, and traffic activity generated by this site. Numerous planning amendments and council directives include protection verbiage for Serendip. 3 independent panels appointed by the minister give evidence-based advice to preserve this quiet rural residential zone to protect Serendip. In C-293, council ordered planning to write a 200-meter buffer recognition sent to the minister into the Lara structure plan that was never actioned. With regard to this planning report at page 52, the officer states, "It is reasonable to explore alternative locations for the proposal, and it is likely that a location with better land use and development planning merits can be found." On page 69, the officer goes on to declare, "The purpose and decision guidelines of the rural living zone do not specifically anticipate the proposed use and development, and do not therefore specifically encourage it. The proposal is conflicting with its negative impacts on residential amenity, environmental assets, landscape values, and adjoining land use, all required to be given weight under the Planning and Environment Act 1987. In December 2018, a decision by the same officer recommending fire station approval refused a permit on the adjoining lot for a tourist accommodation, including 3 cabins and a small cafe. He based his rejection on the site being within the same protective buffer to Serendip, incompatible to amenity and biodiversity risks. A major 24/7 fire facility will be far more invasive at this site, yet gains his approval. The 106 objections received include new homes in Osprey Court, excluded in the application regarding amenity. Had proper public consultation occurred on this, thousands of objections, as in Amendment C73, would exist. Even the one predicted nighttime call-out per day equates to unacceptable sleep deprivation injury to area residents. That's 7 days per week. This application fails to demonstrate it is the best location or even able to deliver the claimed community benefit. It is a clear hazard to Serendip's assets and should therefore be moved. I respectfully plead for the committee to refuse this application and to refer it to an independent panel from Planning Panels Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Councillors, any questions of Frank while we have him with us? Thank you, Frank, and thank you for also pointing out the difference in the Australian standard as well that was referred to by the officer, so we appreciate your work there. I have Donna Dole. Is Donna with us? Thank you, Donna.
There is a number of reasons why I believe the proposed location is unsuitable. Traffic safety. The planning report and other documents do not accurately reflect the recent growth in traffic on Windermere Road East, past the fire station and west towards Bacchus Marsh Road. This includes traffic to the prisons, new residential areas, and a lot of quarry trucks. Windermere Road East is a 5-tonne limit road. Large trucks over 5 tonne often illegally use this road during the day and all hours during the night as a shortcut to Princess Freeway and returning from Princess Freeway to Geelong. The road has never been monitored from the heavy vehicle regulators. I know this from the continuous increase of trucks over 5 tonne. The road has no street lights and cars always use high beams on Windermere Road as visibility is limited. I have observed many cars forgetting their high beams are still on as they are approaching in the opposite lane. This has not impacted on my driving, as I'm fully aware there are kangaroos frequently grazing along Windermere Road, so I am driving accordingly to this. This is not the same for the fire trucks driving to a call-out. There has been no reporting on the speed the fire trucks are driving to call-outs on Windermere Road, where fog is a common occurrence during winter. The planning report states sirens are rarely deployed and flashing lights during Century visitation hours, 8 to 4 every day. I can assure you this is not happening now, even at 2:18 a.m. with no traffic on Windermere Road. Apart from the traffic risk, the idea that fire trucks can operate from the fire station without lights and sirens is nonsense. Just take a breath. Flood risks. We were advised by letter recently dated the 18th of June 21. The city has designated our land on Windermere Road as liable to flooding. There is also plenty of evidence of the FRV land being previously flooded in 2004. YouTube video and also Serendip Creek next to the proposed FRV land. Windermere Road at Hovels Creek has been closed as a result of flooding in the past. This will prevent prompt response to call-outs. The operation of a fire station will have a major impact despite what has been written in the many pages of documents. Much of this has played down the impacts on the Century, the wildlife, neighbouring houses and the new developments. We were only recently told that this was FRV and not the Lara CFA. This misled the many more people who otherwise would have objected to this proposal. I have lived in peace and harmony at Windermere Road for 15 years, and I strongly oppose this application. Thank you for the invitation for me to speak.
Thank you very much, Donna. Councillors, do we have any questions for Donna at this point? Sorry, Councillor Maloney.
Thank you so much for coming in
Thank
today,
you.
and I really appreciate your feedback. With respect to the trucks, do you know what speed that they, you mentioned illegally on that road, do you know what speed that they will be travelling, the regularity? I mean, I assume you would be timing or noting that?
Well, today, as I sat there and wrote this, there was trucks all day long. And during the day, they're probably not speeding, but during the night, there's no one there. They are speeding during the night. It's empty during the night. There's no, people around. They're speeding.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your submission, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list, I had Mike Hellman, please.
Thank you. Thank you, panel, for hearing my submission tonight. I was the ranger in charge of Serendip Sanctuary for over 20 years. I was originally sent there in November '89 to redevelop the Wildlife Research Station into a location where domestic and international visitors could view captive and free-range wildlife in their natural habitats, continue the breeding of endangered and threatened species, and establish and deliver a curriculum-based education service centred upon the flora and fauna of the Western Plains of Victoria. The redevelopment that I put in place was based upon the advice of environmental wildlife experts and was all about the minimum impacts to display native fauna in their natural habitats. As a result of the proposed subdivision known as C73, in the Lara structure plan, where in excess of 300 houses were to be constructed on Serendip Sanctuary's southern boundary, Parks Victoria in 2006 commissioned noted environmentalist Kevin Wood from WBM Engineering and Environmental Consultants. Mr. Wood at the time was one of the few Australian experts who had studied the impacts of urban development on native wildlife. The Woods report clearly detailed the real impacts that this subdivision would have on Serendip's wildlife. His principal points were that animals require most of all day or night, depending on the species, to find food, display to attract a mate to breed with, and to raise their young. Wildlife cannot do these things if part of their day is impacted by disturbance from noise, lights for resting or nocturnal species, or trying to hide from marauding cats and dogs. The Woods report stated that over time, the pressure from predation and urban development results in free-range wildlife leaving the area. The report further stated that captive animals would retreat from their normal behaviours as well and display altered behaviours, including the cessation of breeding for some species. Serendip was specifically and critically designed to manage the movement of visitors throughout the site to minimise visitor impacts on wildlife. The design also restricted visitor impact through noise, movement, etc., to traffic visitors throughout the sanctuary in a way that allowed wildlife to never be surrounded or feel threatened. One of the areas restricted to visitors is the southern part of the sanctuary, which is directly across the road from the proposed fire station. Since the Woods report, you can now go on Google and you are able to view several scholarly articles for the impact of urbanisation on wildlife. All of these experts have drawn the same conclusions and their evidence cannot be disputed. The proposed siting of the fire station opposite Serendip Sanctuary can only be described as urbanisation to the maximum. The Council Planning Officer states in his document that part of the mitigation impacts on Serendip's wildlife will include sanctuary landscape screen planning and baffle light controls. As was said before, we all know screen vegetation will take a minimum of 10 years to provide any sort of screening of fire station activity. The impact on wildlife of baffle light control within the site is debatable. What's not debatable is that fire trucks do not have headlights or emergency lights that are baffled. Serendip Sanctuary will then over time just mimic a municipal park if the fire station development is approved. But where are we today? The strategic and crucial buffer zone that was put in place to protect Serendip's animals is now under threat because a proposed additional fire station is actually being built on the buffer zone. Once the wildlife's gone, it's gone forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Councillors, questions of Mike? Mike, I've got a question for you, I guess, and as you mentioned your previous history as the Serendip, what I would used to call when I was little, the ranger. In terms of what's planned for there at the moment, obviously there's been a process that Parks Victoria have been going through in a master plan. What has been your opinion about what's best for, in a short sentence, what's best for Serendip right now and what's been most successful at Serendip?
Well, certainly all the things it was originally designed to do have been extremely successful. Roger's talked about the international tourism that he brings. We also have lots of other international tourism that come to the site. Our education program is the most successful in Parks Victoria. Far more visitors to Serendip in my time than what there were at Wilson's Promontory, where you had a captive situation. Certainly the Dandenongs National Park. And our normal visitation to actually learn and enjoy the environment of seeing animals in their natural behaviours. We just used to get feedback all the time of how fantastic the experience was at Serendip. Going forward, Parks Victoria is about to, for not only here but the Yuyangs as well, coming up with a master plan. I'm hopeful that based on feedback from some Lara people and others, that they will amend the plan that they're coming up for and hopefully be able to get funding to grow Serendip going forward.
Thank you, Mike. And I might just ask the officers a question around the referral to Parks Victoria. And I'm noting there they haven't mentioned that they're doing a master plan over Yuyangs and Serendip. Was there anything in other correspondence that came that's not in this report around that particular item?
Can I be heard? Yep. I'm answering obviously from the planning perspective as a council officer. This is an application that was referred to Parks Victoria and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in their capacity as public land manager of Serendip.
Yes.
Not so much for, I would say, biodiversity assessment and that type of thing. Now, that's not to say, of course, that that wasn't the lens within which they reviewed the application. Certainly, and you've seen the correspondence that's come back from them, doesn't provide any detailed assessment around biodiversity or any of those kinds of things. But there would be an explanation for that. One is that that was not the reason for the planning referral, first and foremost. But second is, of course, that they did ask that information to be provided as a part of the further information that they requested. That information was provided by an organisation called Nature Advisory, which is a zoologist with consultancy that provides that type of information as a part of planning permit applications. That's the expertise that we relied on here at Council in the decision that we made, not so much the expertise that may or may not exist with the public land manager. Right. And the final part to that is, of course, that they provide a response to that information, and the response that they provided was that with the recommendations in that report, they don't object to the grant of a permit. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I think I find it quite unusual that they are going through a master planning process as to how to reinvigorate, how to ensure that the park is there for the long term, and yet they haven't seemed to mention it at all in their response to us around, because as land managers, things that would affect that land is something that I would have expected from them. So just a note there that they haven't.
They have provided some response in the report report there as well to that very question, which is that the plan that they are developing themselves is not a land use and development plan that extends outside the boundaries of the subject sites that their plan relates to. So in other words, it doesn't provide recommendations about what should or should not happen on adjoining land.
Yes.
That goes to the plan itself, which of course is a publicly available document.
I think most plans would be that you plan for your own land, but I would have thought as land managers for that site, if they saw something that was not conducive to sitting with it or next door it, they would have made the comment, but I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. And Mike, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, while Mike's raised the subject of noise, I'd like to ask the officers again in relation to that. And it comes back to my earlier question about the screen and buffer of trees. I note in the report that there was no width of trees defined, and in fact at one stage cherry ballarts were recommended. It might take 100 years to grow cherry ballarts, but that recommendation, I understand, was corrected. But I observed I've heard the question about how long it will take to grow the trees that have been recommended. So my question to the officers is, has noise been considered in this, and therefore why was not the width of the trees that have been recommended, the depth of the plantation, given any definition? And I have a follow-up question after that, but I'll just hear your answer to this first, please.
Recommendation that we're referring to regarding the screening comes from Nature Advisory's expert information that was provided to the applicant and forward to the department. It's the question with regard to cherry ballarts related to the landscape plan for the subject site itself, not for the vegetation screening. So they were two separate matters that were dealt with. In terms of the screening dimensions, you'll notice with the recommended conditions there that, in particular conditions 5 and 6, that any screening that were to be provided would need to be provided in accordance with the recommendations of that report, but also overseen by a qualified zoologist who would speak to those very matters. The reason why a recommended condition wouldn't go into that level of detail is because council doesn't hold that expertise to determine what is an appropriate dimension. We would rely on the expertise of the zoologist and relevant consultants to determine what an appropriate dimension is. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And so a follow-up question is, I've also noted in the report that there would be the prerequisite is the negotiation of how this is managed into the future, and therefore does that provide some uncertainty about this, given that we do have to the land will be sold at some stage or whatever else?
Are you talking about the screening itself and the maintenance and management of that into the future? So the conditions do speak to the provision of a plan that is agreed by the public land manager in the form of the department, of course, and Fire Rescue Victoria as the operator of the fire station site. That agreement would be ongoing. That would be to the satisfaction of the responsible planning authority, which of course is council. In terms of in the event that the fire station were to revert to a different use or be sold or any of those sorts of things, the agreement would run with the land in the same way that the planning permit would if it was granted. So the commitment would, or the obligation would be ongoing.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation.
Just if I could give Councillor Mason just one little comment about the screen vegetation. A lot of the animals that are down in that part of the sanctuary that choose to make it home are birds that fly, birds that choose to nest down there because it's restricted from traffic of people throughout the sanctuary. And if they're flying above, and have used a particular site. They come back to that site where they've been successful. They will be in the tree or flying to that location. It's not about the screening, it's about the movement and noise that results in that activity that will then force them to say, well, I'm not going to be successful here, I'll move somewhere else further away or to another location totally. So the screen fencing provides some of the ground animals with a little bit of a buffer, but essentially it's about the birds that are flying and able to see what's happening across there, and the noise from there, especially at night, that will cause the problem. When I first started at Serendip, we used to go and take night walks to see what's around and to learn more about the place. You put a torch in a tree, everything in that tree will leave because they're startled by the light and the noise and all of that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Mike. Next, I have Marcia O'Brien. Marcia's here. Thank you.
My name is Marcia O'Brien, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to present here this evening. I lived in Lara for 35 years, taught at Lara Primary School for 25 years, and created and implemented an environmental multimedia classroom, an actual classroom within Serendip itself, for some 13 years. Since retirement, I've volunteered as a tour guide, and Serendip Sanctuary is very close to my heart. Placing a fire station on the perimeter of a sanctuary will have consequences. Consequences for wildlife, both captive and free range, will be disrupted by the sheer volume of human movement, forcing them to move further into the sanctuary, thereby disrupting the balance. Last time I checked, firefighters weren't driving small electric vehicles painted in gumtree green or dressed in camouflage. No, the very nature of fire operations requires big, loud trucks that will scare the daylights out of any creatures living in the vicinity. There will be consequences for environmental education because Serendip, located between the two largest cities in our state, is phenomenally successful and popular with school groups. I'm told 8,000 students in an average year attend Serendip for educational purposes. There'll be consequences for the economy because in normal times, Serendip attracts many local, interstate and international visitors. And finally, there will be consequences for us all for prioritising a fire station at the expense of nature, and in so doing, abrogating our responsibilities to protect and leave a legacy. Serendip is a wondrous place, an exceptional learning environment. As a teacher, I witnessed rapture in the eyes of children when they saw a joey climbing into its mother's pouch clumsily, or a flock of noisy magpie geese flying overhead. I've also seen fear in the eyes of children visiting from Melbourne who are so nature deficit that they're afraid even of the tiniest of ants. With smaller house blocks being the norm these days, places like Serendip are more vital than ever before, so we really do need to protect it. A fire station at Serendip on the boundary is the thin edge of the wedge. Serendip is 1 square mile, that's 260 hectares. There are limits on how far you can push its boundaries. I'm seriously concerned that we're seeing the death by 1,000 cuts. The clock is ticking and global warming is real. I'm asking you to use your influence and leave a positive legacy for future generations whereby nature is ranked higher than a fire station that could easily be located elsewhere. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marcia. Councillors, questions from Marcia while she's here?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Katrina Roundtree. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello, welcome.
Am I allowed to take my mask off?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat. A little bit like Roger, I cannot believe that we are even gathered to have this conversation, that we are discussing here the possibility of a fire station built in front of an animal sanctuary that is 3 minutes from a newly refurbished fire station. I am incredulous. I am a resident of the area. I live up the road from Serendip. I've been there for around about 21 years. And also tonight I'm wearing my international tourism hat. To me, that prospect seems like self-sabotage at a time that Geelong cannot afford to kick in the guts the gifts that it has. And to visually illustrate that to you, I brought in the paper that there was the mention of the fire station, and this was in the Geelong Addy last week. So page 3, there is a major article that tourism in the area is tanking. You turn the page, and there we have the council saying they back a fire station in front of one of the most beautiful natural gifts that this area has. That is called self-sabotage. At a time, you simply cannot afford to do this. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Your businesses in this community are hanging on by a thread. Now, for me, I am here with an international tourism hat on. As many of you know, I've been hosting Getaway for the last 25 years. I am now hosting a new travel and also, I suppose, real estate show, Country House Hunters, and I go to real estate and regional areas right around the nation. So I think I'm in a pretty good position to discuss what's going on here. Certainly, I now have the brand of being Australia's most travelled woman. My point, I have over the last 25 years been to the greatest sanctuaries, the greatest parks on this planet, from Kruger to Denali. I have been to the most beautiful ornithological park in the Camargue region of France, famous for its bird life. Birds that draw in millions of tourists every single year. And of course, I am so proud of our Healesville Sanctuary in the Yarra Valley, broader Yarra Valley, which I think is such a testament to its community and also its council having the backbone to have a green wedge and protecting that area. I'm an ambassador for Zoos Victoria, but specifically I've been there just recently to film at Healesville. The one thing that none of these places have is a fire station on their front gate. And nor would they even consider such a prospect. But there is something that I think that Serendip would be the envy of, and that is the fact that it is 8.6 kilometres from an international airport. That international airport is going to reopen next year. You need to protect what you have. In summary, I went to Serendip yesterday. I just thought, am I wrong? Are the birds gone? Is it really 3 minutes from the closest fire station? I went there and an emu was right at that front door. There was a family having a barbecue in the distance. The emu was walking around us. Can you imagine what international tourists 12 minutes from there would think of that? Was it really 3 minutes from the nearest fire station? I drove it, yes it was. Once again, I just wrap it up with the points that the community members have been saying here. You really need to make a decision based on the grandchildren that you are yet to have. What do you think they would want to see there? What do you think is the right decision for that? Right now you need to back the gifts you already have and do not sabotage what is already there.
Off. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Aiken?
Not so probably much a question, but thank you, Katrina, for your incredible passion that you've displayed tonight over this issue. But just clarification, for clarification, the report in the Geelong Advertiser was about an officer recommendation. In fact, this committee is the decision maker. And that's council does have to consider the recommendation presented before them, but council does not have to accept that recommendation, which is why we have this process tonight. And it's important that you're presenting to us from an international and a very sound basis as to why you're presenting your arguments to us as well too. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Katrina. Thank you. We'll head to the next objected. Jan Bullock. Do we have Jan with us? Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Joanne, for keeping us safe.
Hello, I'm Jan from Lara, and I'd like to say that common sense needs to prevail in this planning proposal. I suggest that Fire Rescue Victoria Station be located to a more appropriate setting where it will be fit for purpose and bring a greater net community benefit. By constructing the station further west along Windermere Road or even on Bacchus Marsh Road would mean that it is more accessible to the bar and prison, who are currently accounting for 40% of the current call-outs to the fire brigade. This location would also mean quicker response times to the Hills Road Industrial Estate, Kemring, the future 3,000 residents of the Lara West area, and to the Northern Growth Corridor communities. Let's be rational and practical. Protect the rural living zone buffer to Serendip and maintain this valuable asset to the wider community and Victoria.
Thank you very much, Jan. Councillors, any questions for Jan? No, thank you very much. I've got 3 more people on my objectors list, and then we'll head to the applicants. So Lionel McWilliam, thank you.
Thank you, councillors, for hearing this tonight, please. My name is Lionel McWilliam, and I live at Kittle Drive in Lara on acreage. Anyway, as far back as December 2019, in meetings held with the Planning Department representatives, it was stated that no applications had been made for a fire station. However, the land had already been purchased by the CFA FRV now. Even the local member would not confirm this. I don't agree that the proposal will result in an orderly planning outcome, as the distance between the 2 fire stations is just over 3 kilometres. It beggars belief that there were no other sites for this fire station considered at all. The problems are the sensitivity of the area and its close location to the current fire station. With future developments to the west, its response times from this area will be compromised, as it already is borderline for most of the intended uses. If it was moved further west, it would mitigate these problems and negate the need for a further fire station to be built to cover these areas. We do need another fire station, but just not where it is proposed. In conclusion, I ask the councillors not to approve this application. The main reasons being there is too much ambiguity in the officer's report, which cannot be covered here in 3 minutes. I ask that an independent panel be appointed to assess all of these unanswered questions. Well, council should back the community's rejection of the new location and refer it to the minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. Councillors, questions for Lionel? No, thank you very much for your submission, Lionel. Dennis Scott, please.
I thank the panel for your time tonight. My name is Dennis Scott and I am a Lara resident and a member of the Lara Care Group. I would like to endorse the comments and objections made by the Lara Care Group members, in particular 2 points. Firstly, the need to move the site west along Windermere Road nearer to Bacchus Marsh Road to improve response times to key sites and residential developments. By doing so, it would improve services to the Lara residents and key businesses, which was the whole point of the second station. Secondly, minimising adverse impacts on the nearby internationally recognised Serendip Sanctuary. On the first point, I would like to add to the previous speaker's comments about the need to move the site with the following comment. The Lara Care Group, in reviewing the City of Greater Geelong report and previous documentation, have found no mention of investigations into alternate sites, including arguments for non-selection, before selecting the current site. It would appear to me that the current site was acquired and the site justification was reverse engineered. On the second point regarding the impacts on Serendip Sanctuary, in the unfortunate event that this proposal is approved at the current site and not moved, the issue of the landscape screening plan becomes critical. While the report under the Sanctuary Landscape Screening section outlines details around the approved plans, plantings, maintenance and associated works, there is no mention of the time for the new screening plants to become effective, and no mention of before and after testing of sound and light levels against agreed requirements to endorse the screening effectiveness and what further actions would be required should it fail. So, in summary, I believe the site should be shifted to improve response timings and the mitigation of adverse effects on Serendip. However, if that is not possible, then the imperative that the effectiveness of the planned sanctuary landscape screening can be validated and measured with before and after testing data by an independent authority and evidenced by no loss of sanctuary wildlife. The report itself confirms that there will indeed be risks and impacts on Serendip and the wildlife, and as it has been mentioned already regarding this wildlife, when it's gone, it's gone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dennis. Councillors, questions for Dennis? Thank you very much, Dennis. The last person I have on my list here is Sean McFadden.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. It's the first time I've turned up to one of these meetings and had a chat, so I'm a little bit nervous, so I apologise to start with. Look, I'm a resident of Lara. Gone to a couple of meetings where things have been proposed and they haven't got up, thankfully. This one is just wrong. Serendip, look, I've got a 9-year-old daughter, so some of the other objectives we're talking about, think of your grandkids and all that sort of thing. So I'm fortunate enough to have a 9-year-old daughter who goes to school in Lara, and she said to me, why are they building that fire station there? It's across the road from Serendip. We've been through there many times. It's a great facility for Geelong, the residents. It costs nothing for parents to take your kids there. There's plenty of wildlife there. The fire site itself, the proposed fire station site itself, I've gone past it on some days and counted 40 or 50 different birds sitting on that land. This is not an infrequent thing, although the report seems to say the birds will move. We've just heard from other people objecting that this will not be the case. We will lose those bird life. We had a lot of bird life there, and because of the development, some of it's moved. We're now pushing it even further away, putting a fire station next to the green belt or the cycleway that connects into Serendip. So there's problems there. No mention on the proposal talking about noise and things like that. The site for the Fire Rescue Victoria, on the plan at the back of it, had a RCR written on there. Now, to me, unless that's incorrect, that's a road crash rescue. That's where they're going to be taking a car, cutting a car up as if they're going to a scene where an accident's occurred. So there's going to be noise from that, dealing with a wreck. This is the sort of thing that should be in an industrial area, not in a rural area. That, to me, I don't even know why that didn't even get mentioned. Thankfully, I know someone who's in the SES, and they pointed it out to me. So that was a clear oversight. That's noise, and not to mention the fact that wrecks will come in, wrecks will go away, so you've got to have a traffic. It's not just 1 or 2 fire trucks a day. fire trucks go out as well during the day, so when they do that and go to the supermarket or go get lunch or whatever they do regularly in Lara, I have no problem with that, but the figures do not add up. The growing population, the figures of trucks that go in and out of that station are going to grow and grow. They're not going to get smaller. So the projections in this report are, well, speaking as a person with a science degree, not brilliant, and I think grossly underestimated. And as one of the other objectors has pointed out tonight, the road itself is very dark at night. I'll just finish off. The road itself is very dark at night. Purposely, the lighting from Caddy's Road onto Windermere Road, there is no light on that corner to keep that buffer zone of light away from the wildlife. So putting in a fire station at that location is going to create a light source, which is going to basically lights on, shining down or shining up into the sky. It's not going to make any difference. Anything in that area is just going to be put off by that light and will be discouraged from living in that area. As I said, we're already losing 40 to 50 birds just in that area that'll end up moving. So, and as my 9-year-old daughter said, I just don't get it. So thank you for your time.
Sean. Thank you, Sean. Councillors, any further questions at this point? Thank you. Okay, thank you. I have on my list Ian De Oliveira. Thank you, from FRV. So we'd like to hear from you, please. And I'll just remind them that we have been respectful, so let's respect the applicant as well, please. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I wasn't sure just how much time we were going to be afforded.
You've got sort of up to about 8 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So what I propose to do is to make some opening remarks and then invite Mr Dominic Scarf, who's the Assistant Chief Fire Officer at the CFA, to explain to you. He's in charge of strategic planning within FRV.
Might just get you to pull your mic a little bit closer so Councillor Aiken can't quite hear you. Thank you.
Mr Scarf is an Assistant Chief Fire Officer at FRV, and he is very much involved with strategic planning for new infrastructure. And so I'll then ask him to address you and explain to you the rationale behind this project and the reasons why this site has been selected. And then I'll come back and then deal with the planning issues if that's acceptable to you, that's the way I'd like to proceed.
Fine. Yep.
Firstly, just to clarify, I acted for the CFA when the CFA was responsible for this project, but as a result of the Fire Services Reform agenda last year, the career fire stations or career firefighter stations, permanently manned fire stations, were transferred to the new entity of FRV. This project has therefore been handed over by CFA to FRV, and my services have been retained to provide continuity, so that I acted for CFA while it was involved. I'm now acting for the FRV. Strategic planning studies. I'll start again. There has been a long-standing recognition that there is a need for a permanently manned fire station at Lara to meet both existing and forecast future demands. In about 2005, CFA commenced a process of evaluating sites and the needs for the provision of new fire protection services in Lara, and concluded that there was an immediate need for a manned fire station. To bridge the gap, a number of temporary buildings were installed on the existing fire station site to carry things over until the new fire station could be established. So there was never intended that the existing fire station in its present configuration would be retained in the future. The intention is that the existing fire station will remain a volunteer firefighter-based facility. The Windermere Road site, the subject land, was selected after detailed internal investigation and groundproofing of drive time analysis, both by groundproofing and also by geospatial analysis. There are key performance indicators that have to be met in terms of the provision of service response times and so on. And this site was selected as a result, it was an outcome of that exercise. Probably appropriate at this stage, so I'm going to hand over to Mr. Scarf to explain to you in detail how the current proposal was formulated. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to stay up there, then you can sit sort of 1.5 metres apart so you don't have to keep moving. That will be fine. So feel free to bring up the chair. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Madam Chair and councillors, thank you very much for having us here tonight to put up the case, I suppose, for the proposed location or the location for the Lara staffed fire station. My name's Dominic Scarf. I'm Assistant Chief Fire Officer for FRV, formerly with MFB. And I suppose just a little bit of background I'd like to cover off on. So both CFA and MFB in their former roles before FRV was commenced in July last year, run in relation to fire and emergency, etc., follow a fairly set plan and invest an enormous amount of resource and time into prevention activities, both urban and rural. They also invest a lot of time in preparation for people in urban and rural environments in the event of an emergency, on what they need to do about having their own plans, etc. The next part of that is obviously the response phase, and that's where fire stations come into play. So when prevention and preparedness don't work, we then go to a response phase, and that's then followed up with a recovery phase after that. So the response phase, because we've got to that response phase, it's essentially time critical. So the location of our stations are very important, and as was outlined earlier, we groundproof them, we use geospatial mapping to determine the best location based on the known risks in a particular area, population density, and industry, those sorts of things in the area, and not just location determined by what we see currently, but what we see going into the future, so residential developments, etc. Therefore, as I said, the location of the stations are important. We've got government reporting requirements on the time it takes us to arrive on scene for a fire incident, the time it takes us to arrive on scene for a road accident rescue, and the same for emergency medical response, which is a program that MFB has been running for about over 20 years, CFA for the last 5, now combined to FRV, and provides a significant support to the ambulance service. Going on from there, the response time, we work to, there's some conjecture around 7.7 or 8 minutes, and that's determined by whether we include the time that it takes Esther to manage the call taking or not. All the groundwork and time measurements for this particular location was based on 8 minutes, which is 90 seconds to get out of the station, and then 6.5 minutes to get on scene. And our mapping indicated that with that time frame, we would get to what we believe are the major risks in the area for Lara and for the greater community. So those major risks being obviously Avalon Airport, the major freeway that runs from Geelong to Melbourne, the 3, soon to be 4 prisons in the area. And again, they're on the outer extremities of that response time, and we need to be mindful that we will get there within that 8 minutes, and then we still have to deal with some other time restraints on us, which is getting through the prison system. So to get to the prison, to get to the front door in that time frame, that's fine. We've still got another few minutes to get through the Schallerfour, some of those other issues that go on with the prison. The same when we go to a hospital. We get to the front door in a certain period of time. We still have to deal with getting through and to where the actual fire or incident or emergency may be. So they're just some of the things that we have to work at. If we then take it back to, I suppose, the risk to community, and that's what the response phase of the FRV is about. We're looking at, as I said, we're looking at hospitals, we're looking at aged care facilities, we're looking at the freeway, we're looking at the prisons, and we're looking at people in their homes. And you know that there's a significant planning for increased residential in the area, and that growth area fits into the location that obviously FRV has identified as being the appropriate location for fire station. Again, that was a journey that started under CFA. They identified that location when FRV commenced. FRV, so a totally different group of mapping people, looked at that location and mapped from that location where they could meet, and could they meet those areas that were identified as the greatest risk in the community. There's some other measures that we also use. We don't report to government, and they're things like fires that are confined to an object of origin or a room of origin. So you need to understand how important time is when a fire starts. Over a period of minutes, it will consume a room that the fire starts in. Over another period of time, if it escapes from that room, it then consumes the whole building, and another period of time it may then spread to adjacent buildings, properties, etc. So that time phase, again, is really critical, and the impact on the community is obviously significant as well. So if a fire is confined to an object or room of origin, the residents or the occupants of that, whether it's a business, a home, an aged care facility or whatever, they'll most likely be able to reoccupy that facility the next day or in a matter of days. If we lose that property, or if there's significant damage, there's an impact on the family or the occupants, where they're going to live, there's insurance concerns, those sorts of things.
Might just get you to wrap up your section, then we'll get Ian to wrap up his.
In summary, look, the background work that's gone on in identifying this site has been significant over a number of years, both through CFA and then now through FRV. The mapping has been run through two totally different processes and still comes back with the same location to meet those risks that are clearly identified in that Lara region.
Thank you. Ian, did you want to wrap up your final comment as well, please? Would you like to use the mic? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps just coming back to the planning scheme for a start, the subject land is in a rural living zone. We all understand the planning history of this area, and whether or not there was an intention to create a buffer, and if there was an intention to create a buffer to Serendip, how would that be constituted? The reality is that the planning scheme as it stands, and that's the document that is binding the council at the moment, is that the land is in a rural living zone. It's not subject to any overlay controls other than a bushfire management overlay, which in fact is probably there as a result of Serendip. There are no policies in the planning scheme or no other guidelines which would indicate that the normal provisions of the rural living zone should not apply. And it would be proper for the council to consider this application on that basis.
Sorry, just quickly wrap it up and then we can ask you some questions.
Rusak in his report has provided a very detailed analysis of this proposal against the relevant provisions of the planning scheme and the state and local planning policy framework, and we endorse the findings that he's arrived at. We don't have, in other words, we don't take issue with them. and it is, I think, critical policy is that the integrated decision-making processes that are provided for in Clause 71 of the scheme that are aimed at achieving a balance between conflicting objectives or provisions in the interests of achieving a sustainable development outcome and a net community benefit. We would contend that the proposal does meet that test and would result in a net community benefit. There are always gains and losses, but on balance, we submit that this proposal does have strong planning merit.
Right, I might hold you there, just as we've been 15 minutes now. So I'll just throw to councillors at this point for questions at this point. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Mason?
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. Could you explain further about this risk analysis you undertook and how many other properties you considered in this analysis?
Probably best if Mr. Scarf answer that question.
Look, in relation to the prior history, as I said earlier, I've come across from MFB, so I've only been involved in this process since July. I think we have someone else in the...
Might just want to just let him know if there was other properties, and then he can share that with us if that's all right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Mason, any further questions?
If this opportunity did not exist, did you ever identify a second tier opportunity?
Thank you. Councillors? Councillor Aiken?
Some of the questions have actually been answered, but I think it needs exact clarification. The facility will be operating 24/7, so there will be people stationed there the whole time?
That's correct.
And are sirens always used when a vehicle leaves to attend the prison or any other activity? Does it always have a siren on?
Emergency response in that location, lights would be required to turn out. Sirens could be turned on at some distance in either direction down that road.
And what triggers that the volunteer facility will go to a call out or the paid facility will go to a call out? What triggers that difference now? Because that's what's actually going to be in that community now.
A call will be received at Esther, and that would be processed, and that would, because there's a permanent fire station facility in that area, then they will be responded. Can I get a bit more understanding of the question?
And then there have been lots of stats put around about the number of call-outs that are going to the prison precinct. Because it's a mandatory requirement that if an alarm goes off, irrespective of whether it's someone just holding a flame or something or heating up the alarm system, you have to attend it. So what is the percentage at the present time of attendance that is going to the prison? And with the Chisholm Road expansion, which effectively is a doubling of the prison precinct, I'd love to know what the call-out rate is now and then what it's going to be when that facility is actually concluded. So what's the percentage that you're going there now?
From what I've heard earlier, my understanding is about 40% of the calls at the moment are to that prison facility. we need, and again, going back to the location of the proposed location of the station, that needs to be balanced with commitments to meeting calls to the freeway, meeting calls to Avalon Airport, and the potential development of an industrial estate around Avalon Airport.
I suppose where I'm leading to is, why isn't it actually at the jail then, as a site location?
Okay, so again, a facility such as a prison, they will have some initial response procedures inside their own prison, as will the majority of workplaces around the state, as would this building. So you'll have a warning system, you'll have some extinguishers, you'll have wardens who are probably trained in the delivery of some very initial fire prevention or fire extinguishment activity. Prisons are the same. But once something gets above a certain scale, then the fire service would attend. So any piece of equipment that detects a fire and sends out a signal requires the fire service to attend.
You've answered the question that the prison precinct was never assessed as a site location. Is that right?
Yes. We don't build FRV wouldn't build a facility solely to cater for one small sector.
We do at Avalon, and we do, like Avalon has a fire service because of the high risk, and we do at other facilities around the state and the nation in terms of if there's known risk that is significant, that it justifies the service. And the prison precinct isn't just one prison, it's like 4 different prisons, and doubling of so the call-out rate for the Fire Rescue Victoria is going to be quite significant at the prison precinct, with the expansion of another 1,700 inmates in the next 18 months.
I acknowledge what you're saying. At FRV haven't investigated the concept of having a fire station at the prisons.
Thank you. One question, Councillor Maloney.
Thank you so much for your detailed response. I just had a question with respect to your negotiations with a developer in acquiring the location or negotiating the site for the proposed fire station. Why wasn't a private search conducted, or why was the developer enlisted in this case? Was it a simple supply and demand type of opportunity, or how was that process engaged? Just for clarity.
This acquisition took place when CFA was the responsible fire authority. Once it had been decided that there was a need for a new fire station on a new site, these studies were undertaken to identify where would be the appropriate location, and CFA, as does FRV, have an internal property department, and where property officers within CFA then approached various neighbours, landowners, and were able to come to an agreement with the owner of this, or the former owner of this particular parcel. And as a result of the purchase or acquisition of that land, it has since been excised under Section 35 of the Subdivision Act. It's currently owned by the CFA, but it's under contract for transfer to FRV.
Thank you. I think we probably, thank you very much for your submissions, and I think we've probably got enough questions now at the moment. Councillors? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to move a alternate recommendation in front of me, and I'll just quickly read it because we are running a little bit behind time. The recommendation is that responsible authority, having considered all the matters which the Planning and Environment Act 1987 requires it to consider, decides to refuse to grant the planning permit for use and development for an emergency services facility and removal of the native vegetation on the road reserve at 147 to 153 Windermere Road on the following grounds. And there are there are 4 grounds there in relation to clauses there. One of them is that in relation to the, it's not consistent with objectives of the clause 21.13, as it doesn't maintain and enhance the rural aspects of Lara and doesn't protect the rural landscape in particular in relation to the environment and the landscape features of the area, and it doesn't protect the biodiversity. At this point, I need a second, and Councillor Aiken will second that motion. I'll quickly speak to it. This is not about the services that are provided by FRV, and I think I speak for all councillors when I say we value the work that you do in the community and that all emergency services do for everybody in the community. In my view, this is in the wrong spot. Having heard all the submissions today and read all the paperwork over the last week, in my view, the wait times are not necessarily the major reason why it has been put in that spot from everything that I can see. I don't quite understand the input by DELP and Parks Victoria. There is no mention of the current master planning process, which I find unusual. Many community members have had input into that process, and we are just waiting on the final plan to be approved by the Parks Victoria Board. So for it not to be referred to in the document, I think is a bit of an oversight from Parks Victoria or DELP or whoever put that in. At this point, I will leave it at that and open it up. Councillor Aiken, would you like to second that?
Thank you, Chair Gresbeck. Look, I support the recommendation to refuse to grant a planning permit for this as well too. I think, look, a strong case has been presented that there is a need for the facility and there is a need for this service, but a more compelling case has actually been presented that it's actually in the wrong spot. It's totally in the wrong spot. And in fact, work needs to be assessed as to where it should be actually located. And why it is in the wrong spot is the Serendip Wetlands and Wildlife Reserve is of state significance. In fact, it probably shouldn't sit under Parks Victoria because they have no other assets like this in Victoria. It actually is a zoological facility and should really probably vested in that part of the state responsibility as opposed to Parks Victoria. And as a consequence, I think we do have a responsibility to protect that site location and the areas that we do have a responsibility to protect the biodiversity of that site location. This is a commercial and industrial activity that is going to occur at the front door, which was so articulately presented by Katrina Roundtree. It will disturb the emerging residential area that exists in terms of the rural and residential area. In fact, Windermere Road is what the ward is named after because it's the 50. It's halfway of the ward and splits it diagonally for those councillors that don't know. The rural character of Lara we have to consider as well too in our planning responsibilities, and the fact is we're putting an activity that is not even currently operating in that site location. So there actually isn't, the fire station is next to other activities that are non-residential or non-rural urban that currently exists in Lara. And we have to consider that as well too. And what Councillor Gresbeck has pointed out, I feel, and other councillors can speak for themselves as well too, but Councillor Gresbeck and I both feel that we have to protect our natural resources, our diversity, our landscape and our heritage values of that particular area, and it is not being shown the respect by actually placing a fire station in at that site location.
Thank you, Councillor Aiken. Mayor Asher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everybody for making the effort and presenting to us tonight. The situation's been really well articulated by all the attendees tonight, and equally I appreciate the work that's gone into the report, so thank you to the team as well. There's a certain amount of truth in the illogical nature of this proposal. I think Katrina Roundtree said it very well. A few points have stood out for me tonight. It does seem odd that the land manager's master plan does not include adjoining land. I think that's a really good point, and indeed a green wedge abutting a nature sanctuary is a very sensible notion. But the report and the applicant are right. I think we appreciate that. These aren't issues covered in the Council's policy and framework, and I completely appreciate the need for the station and the process that's required to get one. I appreciate all the work that's gone into that. But noise, lights, biodiversity and traffic movement are all legitimate policy-based issues to support the objectives. And the upshot, I think, from what I've heard tonight, would suggest that the proximity to the sanctuary in particular obviously does have a major impact on the net community benefit in this area. So I don't think anyone has an issue with a new fire station. I think, as Councillor Aitken said, it's simply where it is and the location. So again, I thank the submitters and the applicants for attending tonight, and I support the alternate recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Maloney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a look online, and given the response times that were mentioned and the service level agreements mentioned by FRV, I've just found 2 appropriate properties available for private sale within the response time area, which would be a more appropriate place for a commercial operation. So I just thought I'd mention that, because that's something that might not have been considered in the past if you've already wedded to a developer's site.
Councillor Maloney. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Grisbeck. I don't have much to add to this, except I did hear one statement about death by 1,000 cuts, and I reflect about Serendip in that light, that it has had a number of wounds over the years, and this is another one, and it could be a tipping point. I haven't been convinced by the arguments that there's no threat from light or noise or other activities, other unusual activities. Disappointed that there doesn't appear to have been enough rigour, and there may have been, but it's not, in my judgment, it doesn't appear to be so, in the identification of alternative sites. We've heard tonight about the jail, hospitals and Avalon, all within 8 minutes minus 90 seconds gathering time. So there must be plenty of other sites there that can provide the same access within 8 minutes. So I also applaud the work done by our fire services, and we really need you. And sometimes everybody's bound by their mandates, and one of the mandates of the fire services is to protect assets. And often assets are regarded as physical assets or property, but the community itself is defining Serendip as an asset and a property that needs protection. And so I really haven't been convinced on the biodiversity protection, and we're learning more and more in this day and age that that's an essential element of our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and endorse the words of the councillors before me. Thank you to the objectors and the community for coming out. Clearly your passion has come through well and truly very strongly, and thank you to the applicants as well for coming, making your case. I won't repeat what my fellow councillors and committee members have said before me, but as a past chair of planning, I do appreciate the recommendation put forth to the officers and how they've come to that conclusion. However, as chair of tourism as well, I have a thorough understanding of the area and just how precious Serendip is, not only the local Lara and Windermere community, but to our region as a whole. It's really our region's geological, native, environmental differences that give us the uniqueness of the Greater Geelong region. In this case, I see the benefit of Serendip outweighing these industrial operations opposite, so I will be supporting the alternative recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. In that point, I'll put the alternate recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much for everyone coming out tonight, and that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.